Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography, and today I'm talking about the 2014 action-adventure historical epic Outcast. In Outcast, Nicolas Cage plays a crusader in the 12th century who's a mentor figure to a young fellow warrior played by Hayden Christensen. But the two have a disagreement about the morality of the war, so they go their separate ways. 3 years later in China, an emperor names his youngest son as his successor, and sends the boy away with his sister to reach the city. But the emperor's bloodthirsty older son arrives and sets off to assassinate his younger brother so he can secure the throne. On their travels, the princess and the young prince run into Hayden Christensen, who's now an opium addict with PTSD, and they pay him to protect them on their journey. And along the way, Hayden and the gang run into a mythical outlaw bandit leader who turns out to be none other than Nicolas Cage. You know, I think I need to issue an apology to the movie Season of the Witch. And don't worry, I haven't gone crazy on you guys, that movie was bad by all means. But you know what? Season of the Witch was shot fairly competently to the point where I could actually tell what was going on during the action. There was an attempt at a thematic cohesion between the backdrop of the Crusades and the main plot. There was a fun back and forth between some of the characters. I mean, Ron Perlman was a hoot and a half in that movie. And most importantly, Nicolas Cage was on screen for almost the entire film. Now what does that have to do with anything? Well, those are all things that today's movie Outcast does not provide us with. And the reason that I brought up Season of the Witch specifically is because that movie and Outcast do have a very similar prologue to them. In both movies, Nicolas Cage plays a fighter in the Crusades, who becomes disillusioned with the hypocritical nature of the priests, so he abandons the cause. But it is kind of weird that there's no inciting incident for Nic Cage's "Are we the baddies" moment in Outcast. Like in Season of the Witch, he kills an innocent woman and then has the light bulb moment that maybe this whole Crusades malarkey is wrong. But in Outcast, he seems perfectly fine killing the enemy one minute, and then out of nowhere he goes, "You know what, Hayden Christensen, let's run off to China." But Hayden wants to keep fighting, even when Cage says there's women and children in jeopardy. But Hayden doesn't seem to care, and little kids do end up dying. Later, Hayden Christensen tells Cage that the children were killed by their own mothers. But we all saw what Anakin did to those younglings in Revenge of the Sith, so how can we take Hayden's word here? But the movie really doesn't do very much with the Crusades portion of the story. To go back to Season of the Witch, in that movie, Nicolas Cage's character spoke out against those who use religion to justify the murder of innocents in the Crusades. And then he later found himself on a quest where the church asked him to escort a potentially innocent woman to her execution, which I think tied in kinda nicely with the backstory they established. The problem was the rest of that movie dropped the ball completely in terms of upholding that theme. But in Outcast, the Crusades backdrop is mainly just there to serve the generic PTSD redemption arc of the protagonist. And it really could have just been any traumatic incident in the place of the Crusade scene. But to be fair, Outcast does make some attempts at conveying important messages, like when Hayden Christensen learns that princesses are women too. No, for real, that's actually a line in this movie.
I'm sorry. A princess is a woman too.
But the brunt of the story is actually about the two heirs to a Chinese emperor competing for sovereignty. And the whole Chinese prince's storyline feels entirely disconnected from the Crusades prologue, and almost like two scripts were mashed together. I think this movie was trying to pander to the Chinese and American markets. I mean, you used to always hear about how well American movies did in China, as long as the movie doesn't have a gay person in it. Outcast was co-produced by a Chinese film group, and I think the movie was trying to capitalize on that combination of American actors in a Chinese setting. And as much as I like to see Nicolas Cage movies do well financially, it is kind of satisfying that this movie underperformed at the box office in China. And apparently one of the reasons why was because the Chinese audience didn't take kindly to the white savior aspect of the story. And yeah, I can kind of see how a Chinese person would take offense to this movie. The plot of this movie is basically about how the only hope these poor Chinese people have is a white guy that's addicted to drugs. It's also quite distracting that everybody in this movie speaks perfect English to each other despite it taking place in China and the Middle East in the 12th century.
Out of the cart!
What seems to be the problem?
We're searching for the prince and princess.
You'll find nothing of interest here.
Let them through!
And parts like that make you wonder if you've downloaded a bad English dub by mistake, but no, that's actually how this movie was released. But honestly, I think that the story of two Chinese princes competing for the role of emperor is actually a fine premise for a decent action-adventure story. It's your classic 1-2 princes kneel before you scenario. That's what I said now. But there's two major things stopping this movie from being anywhere near enjoyable. One of which is the technical aspects. More specifically, the camera work and the editing. This movie is full of quick cuts and shaky camera work. Now, if you regularly watch my reviews, I hope you're not getting tired of me complaining about quick cuts and shaky cam. Because believe me, even I'm getting tired of talking about it over and over and over. And maybe I do need to implement some sort of swear jar system where every time I complain about shaky cam and quick cuts, I put money in a jar. But I feel like I need to bring it up every time because when those things aren't used properly, they do detract from my enjoyment of a film. I mean, when I could tell what was going on in the action, it actually was kind of enjoyable. The director of this movie, Nick Powell, was a stunt coordinator on some big projects. And that almost makes it worse because you can tell that there was probably some good fight choreography in there somewhere. Like there's a pretty cool fight scene with an unarmed martial artist beating the shit out of a bunch of soldiers. But that scene's over in about 20 seconds, and even then it's pretty overly edited. And for the majority of the film, the action is just chopped up way too much to be enjoyable. And sometimes I literally couldn't even follow what was going on in the fight scene, and I think that's quite a big problem. There's also a lot of Dutch angles in this movie. For those who don't know, that's where the camera is framed kind of diagonally for artistic purposes. But here I thought they were distracting and ugly looking. And there's some stretches in the film where it felt like almost every other shot was slightly askew. It's especially off-putting when it's a shot of a building structure at a tilted angle, like it's a Leaning Tower of Pisa or some shit. I think this movie has the most Dutch angles I've seen since Battlefield Earth. And speaking of that, Nic Cage with the long black hair in this movie does kind of look like John Travolta from Battlefield Earth, doesn't he? But to be fair, the whole movie isn't all Dutch angles. There's stretches where some of the shots are framed rather nicely, but then it's right back to the ugly Dutch angles. And it just felt like there was generally a lack of artistic vision to the presentation of this film. For example, the movie opens with these jarring slow-mo close-up crossfades of Hayden Christensen. And in the closing shot of the entire film, the camera awkwardly shakily pans to a random spot in the sky and then fades to black. It just really felt to me like not much thought was put into the end product of this movie. But the other category that this movie is majorly lacking in is with the characters and the performances. And usually I start this segment by talking about my boy Nicolas Cage, but he plays a supporting role here, so let's build up to him. The main character in this movie is played by Hayden Christensen, who got a lot of shit for his performance in the Star Wars prequels. And I don't think I've actually seen him in much else. But I wanted to be fair to him with my assessment of his acting. You know, Revenge of the Sith was a long time ago, and he did have to deliver some awful dialogue that would be hard for anybody to pull off. So I decided to set aside his performance in the Star Wars prequels and judge him objectively for his performance in Outcast. Which is easier said than done when there's scenes in this movie where he's surrounded by sand.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating.
But I'm sorry to say that Hayden Christensen is not very good here. He's doing some sort of regional accent that I couldn't quite place.
Stop, this is finished. Go then. Go east!
Kill him then. I just want my sword back.
But in general, Hayden Christensen just gives a fairly flat and lifeless performance here. If I was being generous, I'd say it was quite possibly on purpose because his character is an opium addict, a substance that's known for dulling the senses. And we occasionally get to see his blurry opium vision, but it barely seems to impede his fighting skills. Apart from the bit where he literally gets pissed on by a guy. Need I remind you that this is the hero of our story? I suppose Hayden Christensen does look cool swinging a sword around, and he looks sexy without a shirt, which I assume is the main reason why he was even cast. But I just found him quite lacking in charisma as the lead role here. And the interactions between him and the other characters are entirely uninteresting. There's a romance subplot between Hayden and the princess, but it's just two bland characters with no chemistry, so I felt nothing when they kissed. There's also a villager girl who they rescue who tags along too for the whole movie, but I kept forgetting that she was even there. And I don't really like to criticize young actors, it feels kind of mean. So I'll just show you a clip of the young prince talking to the village girl so you can get a feel of a typical kind of interaction in this movie.
I believe you're just a boy. And Xingyun is still far away.
And yet, it's closer than yesterday.
And these are the characters that we're stuck with for the majority of the movie. But I bet you're all wondering, what about Nicolas the White Ghost Cage? Yeah, I forgot to mention, that's his alias in this movie.
I am the White Ghost.
So I've already talked about that opening portion of the movie where we meet Nicolas Cage as a crusader. And there Nic Cage is kind of subdued apart from having some sort of accent.
The blood we spill here is on our blades, our souls.
And he gets one big scream in.
Come on!
But at the 8-minute mark, the story jumps ahead 3 years and the plot pivots to the Chinese prince and Hayden Christensen, and Nic Cage is nowhere to be seen for a big ol' chunk of this film. And lately, I've mostly been covering movies where Nicolas Cage has a lot of screen time, so I'd forgotten how much it sucks to have to wait ages for him to show up, especially when what they're giving us instead is these boring characters. At one point, Hayden Christensen punches an unarmed woman in the face, and that just made me miss Nicolas Cage even more. Around about 40 minutes in, Hayden Christensen is teaching the prince how to shoot a bow and arrow. And then it cuts to a flashback of Hayden being taught by Nicolas Cage, who's wearing a woolly hat. And I thought, great, there's gonna be a fun training sequence with Nic Cage. But he barely says anything, and then the scene is over and the movie's back to being Nicolas Cage-less again. But literally 1 hour into the movie, look who shows back up.
You're the most beautiful singing voice. But the guards cut out her tongue.
Thank you, one true God, for this gift of Nic Cage I'm about to receive. I mean, talk about a white savior. Nicolas Cage here gives me everything I want out of the unhinged Nicolas Cage performance. He's rocking what kind of looks like dreadlocks with a top knot. You've got that trademark Nicolas Cage wheezy laugh.
How old are you? 10?
14!
At some points it sounds like he's doing an impression of Captain Jack Sparrow.
Keeps the ghosts at bay, huh? This is my medicine.
And other times he's just straight up unintelligible.
My wife. She's good with a knife, hey lad?
All I heard there was, my wife, she's good with a knife, hey lad. What? Plus he's delivering ridiculous lines about farts and goats' asses.
Black guards are as thick as flies on a farting goat's ass because of you.
Also, he now has one eye, which is a weird little through line in Nicolas Cage's filmography, because in Season of the Witch he got slashed in the eye and had a wound. And in my review of Drive Angry, I talked about how one of the reasons Nic Cage even took the role was because there's a scene where his character's eye gets shot out. But in Drive Angry, there was at least some cool makeup around the eye wound. But in Outcast, the extent of Nicolas Cage's character having one eye is that Nic Cage is just keeping one of his eyes closed. Although sometimes I think he forgets and you can kind of see his right eye open a little bit. I also forgot to mention that he now has a snake that he just holds and wiggles around to emphasize his points. And at one point he scratches his chin using the snake, which is hilarious to me. I assume that they deleted the scene where he uses the snake as a skipping rope and to floss his teeth and other Flintstonian shenanigans. He also gets a big heroic battle scene at the end, which I was just about able to kind of enjoy despite the quick cuts because of the crazy faces Nicolas Cage was making. And then after that, he's out of the film again and the movie goes back to being boring. So overall, this movie has a 5% on Rotten Tomatoes and a dirty look to its presentation. So in other words, Outcast is not so fresh and it's not so clean. Do you get it? Like the song by the band Outcast? But seriously though, yeah, this movie is bad. The acting is bad, the dialogue is bad, the camera work and editing is bad, it's paced badly. And worst of all, Nicolas Cage isn't in it that much. I don't really recommend this movie, but if you're a Nicolas Cage aficionado, then maybe check it out because he is very entertaining in it. But do yourself a favor and skip ahead 1 hour in because that's where all the fun Nicolas Cage moments are. So the next movie Nicolas Cage was in was Left Behind, so until then, wish me luck, and thanks for watching.